passing. Rest in peace.
Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This tired old government has been in power for nearly a decade. The cost of living is rising, real wages are going backwards, debt and deficit is the worst it has ever been, aged care is in crisis, Medicare is under attack. Why does this Prime Minister always go missing? Why does he never take responsibility? And why does he always try to divide the country instead of uniting it?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, this is a tired old opposition with no economic plan for a government or the future of this country. And, Mr Speaker, tonight they have the opportunity to actually spell out an economic plan, an alternative budget for this country. They've been waiting, Mr Speaker, and the Australian people are still waiting to hear their economic plan. A tired opposition with no economic plan, Mr Speaker. Alternatively, though, this government, Mr Speaker, this government has delivered an economic plan that is keeping Australians and putting Australians into work. Mr Speaker, this is a government whose economic plan has ensured that we've been able to list 2,800 medicines on the PBS, Mr Speaker, listed in new listings which are changing lives, saving lives, Mr Speaker. This is a government that has delivered the record investments in health, in education, that has backed in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, that has the highest rate of bulk billing this country has ever known, Mr Speaker. A government that has lifted defence spending as a share of our economy to 2% from the 1.56% from what we inherited from those office. This is a government, Mr Speaker, if we had left the tax rates where we inherited them from the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, if you're earning $90,000 today, you would be paying $50 a week more in tax every single week, Mr Speaker. Our economic plan is delivering for Australia, Mr Speaker, as the Treasurer reminded us this week. It's an economic plan that has put people into jobs. It is an economic plan, Mr Speaker, that ensures that we can pay for the things. We can pay for the things that we promise and we deliver, Mr Speaker, because if you cannot manage the economy, Mr Speaker, if you cannot manage the nation's finances, then you can't pay for aged care, you can't pay for the PBS, you can't pay for the Defence Forces. It was the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, when they were last in government, had to not list medicines on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme because they couldn't manage money. And we have a Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, leading a tired old opposition with no economic plan, Mr Speaker, who will revert to type if he ever occupies these Treasurer benches. He has, Mr Speaker, spent a lifetime advocating for things that he now says he walks away from. But, Mr Speaker,
the Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. You won't be surprised that it's on relevance.
I want to hear what the point of order is first. I want to hear what the point...
On relevance. Mr Speaker, the question went to the government's policy. On relevance, the question went to the government's position. If he can't speak for 3 minutes about his own government, he should just sit down.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The question was extremely broad. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, our government has an economic plan that is working, that is delivered for Australians, that sets up Australia for the next decade of opportunity, which cannot be taken for granted, Mr Speaker, and that is in contrast to a tired old opposition who, after all this time, still does not have an economic plan and still, as ever, cannot be trusted with the nation's finances.
The member for Chisholm has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government's economic plan has been delivering for Australians and backs the aspiration and enterprise of Australians to create a stronger future for our nation?
The Prime Minister has.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for her question. The member for Chisholm, who was elected, made commitments and has kept them for the people of Chisholm, Mr Speaker, kept them for the people of Chisholm, as we have made commitments, Mr Speaker, which we have kept, Mr Speaker, and we have delivered. And central to those, Mr Speaker, is our economic plan. Our economic plan is working because Australians are working, Mr Speaker. As a government, our economic plan has meant that Australia's unemployment rate has fallen to 4%, Mr Speaker, from 5.7%. When the Labor Party is in power, they took the unemployment rate from 4.2% and put it up to 5.7%, Mr Speaker. The youth unemployment now is in single digits. Single digits, Mr Speaker. 1 million more women are in work today, and the female unemployment rate in this country is at its lowest level since 1974. Mr Speaker, our economic plan is equipping Australians with the skills that they need. We have more trade apprentices in training right now. 220,000, Mr Speaker. That is more than at any other time in Australia's recorded history, going back to 1963. Mr Speaker, our economic plan has backed in businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, to invest and retain their apprentices, Mr Speaker. What that means is businesses supported by lower taxes. We've cut the tax rate for small and medium-sized business to 25%. Our instant asset write-off and immediate expensing provisions has given business the confidence to invest, so we have a business-led recovery out of this pandemic. Mr Speaker, our economic plan is rejuvenating the manufacturing in Australia, so we're making more things in Australia, particularly with advanced manufacturing. Our economic plan is connecting regions to more markets. It's connecting businesses to the digital economy. Our economic plan is securing affordable, reliable energy for households and businesses right across the country. And we're not getting this through higher taxes, Mr Speaker. That's the Labor Party's approach. We're doing it through sensible investments that is driving down the cost of electricity by 8% over the last 2 years. It's an economic plan that has secured our AAA credit rating at a time of great economic crisis, Mr Speaker, and our government's economic plan has delivered that. That is what we've delivered. But, Mr Speaker, our economic plan that has taken us through this pandemic to have one of the strongest economies in the world today for advanced economies, that has seen 40,000 lives saved, but has seen 375,000 additional jobs, Mr Speaker, putting us on the top of the advanced economies of the world, Mr Speaker, with stronger growth, more jobs, Mr Speaker, and less debt than our comparative economies around the world, including the G7.
Prime Minister's time
it's primed
has
Australia.
expired. Member for McEwen. Member for Ballarat has the
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, floodwaters overran the Lismore levee for the second time in just over a month. The community is dealing with a second round of devastation before they have even begun to recover from the last flood. How on earth did the government fail to list Lismore as a priority area for flood mitigation funding through its Preparing Australian Communities program?
The Prime Minister
Speaker,
has the call.
And I'll hand over to the Minister representing the Minister, Mr Speaker, in this area. Mr Speaker, I spoke to Steve Gregg, the Mayor of Lismore, this morning, and to speak to him directly about the government's ongoing support and response to the floods in Lismore. And I thank Mayor Stephen Gregg, as I know the member for Page would be, Mr Speaker, if he was here today, but he's obviously with his own electorate and in the seat of Page, as I'm sure the member for Richmond is also, Mr Speaker. And we spoke about the ongoing support. He was very appreciative of that support. He was also very appreciative of the ADF's presence there, which is very reassuring at a time of great stress and trauma. And in addition to that, Mr Speaker, we spoke of our government's commitment to over $150 million to ensure that the very mitigation works that are necessary in Lismore, Mr Speaker, that his council and his election as Mayor in Lismore will now enable us to do after they were opposed for so long, Mr Speaker. And so I'm very pleased that we'll be able to proceed with that. I'll hand it over to the Minister representing to add further to my answer.
The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The program the member asked a question about is in fact a competitive grants program and in fact is right across the country. It's part of a comprehensive package, not just through the ERF and $50 million a year, but also in terms of $400 million a year in our package for mitigation works. And it's important for those opposite to understand that natural disasters are indiscriminate in where they may hit across this country. And while our hearts go out to those people in Lismore, there is nothing to say that a natural disaster may not hit in another part of this country. And it's important to understand that this is a partnership with states. This comes down to appropriate planning at a local and state level and making sure that we work in partnership, not just in the federal government putting out competitive grants, but working with state governments and making sure that we get value for money. Value for money, not just in flood mitigation, but as we learned from bushfires, making sure that we work with those bushfire communities and mitigation works into the future. This is about ensuring that we move towards a system and a competitive grants program that goes right across the country. And now that we've obviously seen in South East Queensland, Northern New South Wales, these number of disasters, then as part of the recovery process in partnership will be funding for those mitigation works that the state governments can apply for. That's part of the normal arrangements in which we've had with states that are long-standing. That is nothing new. This was in addition to that. These are programs in addition to what we have in normal funding arrangements with state governments. So we would encourage the state government to put forward any mitigation works as part of that recovery, and we will continue to roll out these programs as part of our commitment to keep Australians safe well into the future.
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House of the Morrison government's strong record of delivering tax cuts for Australian families and businesses to help relieve cost of living pressures, including on the Gold Coast? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question. And she's been an outstanding representative for her community, and like others on this side of the House. 3 years ago, we went to the Australian people and we said we would make our economy stronger, and we delivered, Mr Speaker. 3 years ago, we went to the Australian people and we would help more people get into work, and we delivered, Mr Speaker. And 3 years ago, we went to the Australian people and we said we would lower taxes, and we delivered, Mr Speaker. Today, the unemployment rate in Australia, after the first recession in nearly 30 years, is the equal lowest in 48 years at 4%, Mr Speaker. Female unemployment today is at its lowest level since 1974. When those opposite came to government, the unemployment rate was 4.2%. When those opposite left government, the unemployment rate was 5.7%, Mr Speaker. Under the coalition, there are nearly 2 million more Australians in work than when we came to government. Our economic recovery has been faster, has been stronger than all major advanced economies in the world, faster than the United States, faster than the United Kingdom, faster than France, faster than Germany, faster than Italy and faster than Japan. And a key part of our economic plan is lower taxes, Mr Speaker. Lower taxes for small businesses at their lowest level in 50 years. Investment incentives so that businesses can back themselves to grow. And what we have seen with those record business investment incentives is that business investment is expected to be up more than 5% this year and 9% next year, Mr Speaker. The loss carryback measures, the measures in the budget earlier this week to give 120% tax deduction to small businesses that go and train their workers, that go invest in the digital economy. That is what a good economic plan does. It enables, it empowers the private sector to back themselves, to grow and to hire more employees. Now, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House believe in lower taxes. Lower taxes for Australian families, with $40 billion already delivered since the start of the pandemic, and a legislated 3-stage tax plan. Those opposite believe in higher taxes, because we remember at the last election they promised $387 billion of higher taxes. Now they're promising a budget after the election, where they want to be flexible when it comes to taxation. Well, the Australian people deserve to know how flexible they will be before the next election, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House stand for more jobs, a stronger economy and lower taxes.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's department has told Senate estimates that the decision to delay the national emergency declaration following recent record-breaking floods was a subjective and personal decision made by you, Prime Minister. How on earth can the Prime Minister justify delaying that decision for a full 9 days when the need was so clearly there and flood victims were so desperate for help?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those opposite may not be aware, Mr Speaker. They may not be aware. They may not. They're not aware of a lot of things, Mr Speaker. They're not aware of how to put a budget together for a start, Mr Speaker, amongst many other things. But they may not be aware, Mr Speaker, that the first response of the government in relation to all of these issues was to get the support there immediately. To get it there immediately, Mr Speaker. Now, the Leader of the Opposition interjects. The Leader of the Opposition interjects with, "Oh yeah, Mr Speaker." Well, I'd like him to go and speak to the chopper pilot from the ADF, Mr Speaker, and tell him, as he was winching people off Bruce, Mr Speaker, and describe his efforts on that day as, "Oh yeah, Mr Speaker." I'd like him to tell them that, Mr Speaker. I'd like him to tell them that.
Members on
because
my
what
left.
we've seen from this Leader of the
Members on
Labor
my
Party
left.
over the last 3.5 years, Mr Speaker, this is taking your interjection.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Goes to relevance. The question wasn't about me. If it was, I'm quite happy to have a debate about the fact that I spoke to the flood
Leader of the
victims,
Opposition will
unlike you.
resume his seat. The Prime Minister is relevant to the question, and I return him to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Opposition Leader wishes to interject, Mr Speaker, then he should expect me to respond, Mr Speaker. He should expect me to respond, and I will, Mr Speaker. I will, because when I was in Lismore, Mr Speaker, I was in the dairy farms, I was in people's homes, I was in their businesses, I was there with the leadership of the councils and their officers to ensure that the support we've provided has been timely and targeted, and it was been welcomed by the Mayor of Lismore again today, Mr Speaker, as it was by the Mayor of Ballina when I met with the Mayor of Ballina, Mr Speaker. And so we will continue to provide that support. And that was the immediate response that was necessary to get the financial support in place, to get the ADF there and supporting, Mr Speaker. And the matters that involved the state of emergency declaration, I consulted with both the Premier of New South Wales and the Premier of Queensland, Mr Speaker. The Premier of Queensland did not wish us to declare a state of emergency in Queensland. I listened to her and I took her advice, Mr Speaker. The Premier of New South Wales was happy to do that. The state of emergency declaration does not trigger payments. It does not trigger ADF involvement, Mr Speaker. It does not trigger either of those things. Mr Speaker, those two things are the things we did immediately. The state of emergency assists with the recovery works and the facilitation of the processing of recovery efforts after the flood event. If the Leader of the Opposition spent more time understanding responses rather than politicising them, Mr Speaker, as he has done through fire, through flood, through pandemic, through cyclone, Mr Speaker, this Leader of the Labor Party has politicised every natural disaster to his shame.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I don't need to inform you on that. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The member for Parkes has the floor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. The Morrison-Joyce government has delivered a budget which provides record infrastructure investment to turbocharge the economies of regional Australia. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please outline to the House the importance of growing the nation through critical infrastructure investments that make Australia as strong as possible, as quickly as possible? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative policies?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and also note the response of the Treasurer. It is very important that we understand that this is a budget that is not just for the forward estimates but for decades ahead. And it's so important that we understand some of the substantial investment, such as the Beveridge Intermodal Terminal, which is at $1.5 billion, where the Mayor of Mitchell in Victoria says it will employ about 20,000 people, include 20,000 jobs, will be inspired by that in Victoria. Mr Speaker, in the seat of Parks and Neil Highway, about $1.5 billion has been invested in that, and the biggest investment project in Australia, the Inland Rail, goes through the seat of Parks. And this is a clear example of the investment that we are making in the future of our nation to make it stronger, and make it happen as quickly as possible. And it's not just there. We are making massive investments in the Pilbara. This is an area where tens of billions of dollars are being invested by the companies in that area, and we are building on it. We believe that it is untenable that in the 4,000 kilometres between Perth and Darwin we don't have a city of 100,000 people, and we are working with these companies to make sure we build the Gladstone, we build the Newcastle of the northwest of Australia. This is vision, this is what we do. We are sealing the roads through the desert, through the Tanami into these areas. We're building the dams in North Queensland, Hells Gate, Urana, but of course we need Labor support in a state level. We are building the ports, whether it's Bundaberg Port, and being proud enough to stand behind the miners of the Hunter Valley in upgrading Newcastle Port. We are making sure that this nation is stronger. We are making sure that we have the capacity to expand our agricultural production. 60,000 hectares from one dam alone before we get to Urana. But the member for Parks asked for alternative policies, and we will see tonight whether there are other alternative policies. We will see tonight whether their blood runs red or green tonight. That is why we will be able to choose. Will they support? Will they support Hells Gate Dam? Will they support Urana Dam? Will they support the Hunter Valley and the coal miners? Will they support the great city of Gladstone and their miners? Will they support the Northern Territory and the vision for our nation? This, Mr Speaker, is an election where we have a choice. We have a choice whether we want the Minister for Defence to be the member for Gorton or the member for Dixon. We have a choice whether we want the Foreign Affairs Minister to be Senator Maurice Payne or Senator Penny Wong. We have a choice. We have a choice whether we want Sneaky Jim. Jim is the Treasurer or Josh Frydenberg. We have a choice, Mr Speaker. We have a choice whether we want the member for Cook or we want the member for Grainler. And I know the choice the Australian people will make.
The member's time has expired, and the member for Indi has the call.
I'll bring you back.
Just get you to wait there a moment, member for Indi. Member for Indi, just wait a moment, please. The interjections on my left, particularly, are far too high. Members have a right to be heard in relative silence. The member for Indi has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. This week's budget forks out $13 billion for dams with no business cases and hand-picked projects in seats targeted by the Coalition. The big ticket item on regional healthcare is 80 additional medical student training places. It would take 5,000 extra healthcare workers in regional Australia just to give us the same level of health access as the cities get. And you give us just 80 medical student places, 0.02% of what is needed. After a decade in government, why can the Coalition always find money for marginal seats in Queensland but never enough to fix the regional health crisis?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question. Might I say that the dams that we've picked are actually been dams that the Labor government in Queensland also picked. And they picked Urana Dam and they picked Hells Gate Dam. But the problem is, and I say to the honourable member, we don't believe that even when we put all the money on the table, whether they'll build it. That is the issue. And, well, We'll find out tonight. They haven't said yes. They don't. The interjection was we said that they didn't agree with them. Well, at this point, I tell the honourable member they haven't. They haven't agreed to it. We'll see tonight whether their blood runs red or green. It'll be evident tonight. It said it runs red and green. He said it runs red and green as a Prime Minister because they're a Labor Green coalition. Said so by the member for Greenland. He won't let me answer
the Deputy
your question.
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. This is a question, a serious question from a crossbench member of this parliament.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The gentleman, colleague, members, enough. Enough. Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes. Thank you. And now we are making massive investments in health. We are putting $66 million into MRIs, and I note that there is a massive program that has been put forward in our health section, and I note that the member for Lyne has been absolutely instrumental, and I know you're interested in regional health, so I think it's very important in respect to your question that I let the member for Lyne, the Minister for Regional Health, Assistant Health Minister, answer further to your question.
The Regional Minister for Health has the call.
For that question, we have put forward a very strong program of initiatives in this budget, $296 million. The 80 Commonwealth-supported medical school places is just one. There is also a long-term delivery of more medical students through funding to Charles Sturt University that the member for Calare fought for, 14.8. They will be delivering a rural clinical school out of their home base in Orange around many towns in regional New South Wales. And as well as that, we have just announced 2 University Departments of Rural Health that train allied health students, nurses, physios, occupational therapists in Western Australia, in the goldfields and in the southwest. And that is not new. That is part of an existing program. We have a 10-year stronger rural health practice. You mentioned the number 5,000. In fact, I just checked before I came here. How uncanny. Since we started the 10 years stronger rural health strategy, the number of full-time equivalent GPs is 1,300, nurses is 1,200, and allied health practitioners is 2,500. That is actually, from that strategy, it's already delivered 5,000 new health professions across the whole spectrum into regional Australia.
Well done. The member for Isaacs has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports that the Solicitor General, Stephen Donoghue, sought to intervene on behalf of the Attorney-General in a matter before the High Court today. Prime Minister, why are taxpayers paying for the Commonwealth's most senior lawyer, the Solicitor General, to go to the High Court to intervene in an internal New South Wales Liberal Party dispute?
Order. Order. The Minister representing the Attorney-General.
Well, I do thank the Shadow Attorney-General for his question and for his many distinguished years of service to the nation. As the Shadow Attorney-General, this line of the Labor Party, this champion of working people who lives in Malvern in the electorate of Higgins.
I don't need to hear from on this. The minister will return to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Deputy Leader of Manager of Opposition Business can resume his seat. You can resume your seat. I know what you're going to say. The minister will return to the question, please.
This champion of the working people, Mr Speaker.
The minister will return to the question. We'll return to the question.
With an assiduous interest in questions.
The minister The Minister will address the question.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm addressing the question.
Resume your seat.
I'm acknowledging the Shadow Attorney-General's disinterested commitment to justice. Mr Speaker, his disinterested commitment to justice. It's not a grubby political attack, Mr Speaker.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business, on a point of order.
Well, Speaker, I think you know the point of order because you've been giving the Minister the signal on relevance.
Right.
This is a serious question about the use of taxpayer resources.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business can resume his seat. I would ask the Minister to direct his response to the question.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. As the House would be aware, there are well-established protocols under which Commonwealth representation in matters of this kind occurs, and these decisions have been taken in accordance with those protocols, Mr Speaker.
Order. Member for Isaacs. Order. The member for Stirling has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer explain to the House how the Morrison government's economic plan is ensuring the largest and the fastest improvement to the budget bottom line in over 70 years, as well as the equal lowest unemployment rate in 48 years? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
Just before I give the call to the Treasurer, the level of interjections is far too high. I've been extraordinarily lenient. If members continue to interject, they will be removed under 94A. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Stirling for his question and acknowledge his long-standing service, not just to his community, but also to our country in many different capacities, including in the area of defence. Mr Speaker, the budget I delivered earlier this week shows that the economy is strengthening and growing, that the unemployment rate is coming down, and that wages are strengthening. And we are now banking the dividend of that stronger economy, where the unemployment rate is at the equal lowest in 48 years. And we have printed a number with a 3 in front of it, which will see unemployment at its lowest level in some 50 years. Now, this has seen a more than $100 billion improvement to the budget bottom line, Mr Speaker. The fastest consolidation, Mr Speaker, that we have seen in Australia in more than 70 years. The deficits as a share of the economy more than halve over the forward estimates, and then more than halve again over the medium term, Mr Speaker. Gross debt, Mr Speaker, peaks 4 years earlier than what was previously forecast and more than 5 percentage points lower than what was previously forecast. We have taken the hard decisions, Mr Speaker. We ended the emergency-level economic support like JobKeeper. Now, the Leader of the Opposition criticised us when we did that. He said in his own words the economic roof would come crashing down. Well, within 3 months after we ended JobKeeper, 120,000 more people were in work, Mr Speaker. And now our economic plan is delivering a stronger economy and faster and stronger recovery than what we've seen across major advanced economies. That is what you get with an economic plan that is working. And we outlined our plans for future economic growth with more investments in our regions, backing small business, Mr Speaker, with new tax deductions to go and purchase new digital equipment, as well as skilling their workers. Now, I'm asked about alternative approaches. And we know that the Leader of the Opposition, who's never held a Treasury portfolio, never delivered a budget, Mr Speaker, who thinks a version of an economic plan is tabling his Year 10 economic assignment, Mr Speaker, who tonight has an opportunity to put an alternative budget, but we will see very little except personal criticism and slagging off the Leader of the government, Mr Speaker. The reality is we have delivered more jobs, Mr Speaker, as we promised. We have delivered a stronger economy, as we promised. We have delivered lower taxes, as we promised.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the Minister's previous answer. How on earth is it appropriate for the government's most senior legal advisor, the Solicitor General, to appear in an internal dispute within the New South Wales branch of the Liberal Party? And whose side has the Solicitor General been instructed to support in this ongoing faction fight?
No, the Minister representing the Attorney-General has the call.
I do thank the Deputy Manager of Opposition Business for that question. I addressed that in my previous answer, and there's nothing more to add to that very comprehensive previous answer.
The member for Higgins has the call. The member for Higgins has the call.
Can't quite hear you. Thank
Order,
you, Mr.
members on my left.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future is keeping Australians safe from a range of threats to our national security and community safety? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and congratulate her on the great work that she has done supporting the government's agenda during her first term in Parliament. Now, Mr Speaker, as the Treasurer said in his budget speech, we live in very uncertain times, and that's why safety and security underpins everything that this government does. It underpins our plans to make sure that Australia is stronger and that we are able to ease the cost of living pressures. We can't afford to be complacent about the range of threats that are facing our nation. Whether it's a cyber attack on the systems that we rely on, whether it's drugs and weapons entering our country and ending up on our streets, whether it's foreign interference threatening our sovereignty, or whether it's the ongoing threat of terrorism, keeping Australians safe is our most serious priority. Now, the Morrison government has a very strong record in national security, and the budget that was delivered this week certainly delivers on that. There's funding under there for our new counter-terrorism strategy to counter violent extremism and create a new terrorist offenders register. There's over $280 million to boost the capabilities of our law enforcement agencies so that they can target serious and organised crime. There's an extra $50 million for community-led projects that divert young people from a life of crime and make our communities safer. And there's the most significant cyber investment ever, with $9.9 billion to bolster our nation's cyber defences and our intelligence capabilities. And importantly, that includes bolstering our defensive and offensive capabilities. Now, on top of that, Mr Speaker, this week we have passed further vital legislation to keep us safe, to further secure our critical infrastructure and to give our law enforcement agencies the backing that they need to keep us safe. Mr Speaker, national security is important. Border security is important. Keeping Australians safe is important. And those things are in the coalition government's DNA. We can always be relied on to make sure that Australians are safe. Now, I have been asked whether there's an alternative approach. Now, over the last 3 years, Labor has had the opportunity on multiple occasions to speak about national security, but they have not. They have missed every opportunity to put forward their policy. The coalition government under Prime Minister Morrison is very clear on what its forward plans are for national security.
On my left. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the previous answer from the Minister. The government has admitted using government resources to intervene in a legal dispute within the New South Wales Liberal Party. The Australian people have become used to the government using government resources for internal Liberal Party benefit. But isn't this a new low, to use government resources for a faction fight in the Prime Minister's own branch?
Order. 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 Member for Sydney. The member for McNamara is warned. The Minister representing the Attorney-General has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I would make the point to the House that it's by no means unusual that matters of this kind are considered by the High Court, and indeed, as it happens, there is a matter regarding the takeover of the Labor Party in Victoria, which is presently before the High Court as well. I repeat the answer. I repeat the answer I gave, Mr Speaker.
The Minister will resume his seat just for one moment. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, this question is about the use of taxpayer resources for an internal faction fight.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Minister is in order. And the member for Dunkley is warned. If someone wants to fess up around the member for Dunkley. The member for Patterson is warned. The Minister representing the Attorney-General.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And as I had said in previous answers, there are well-established protocols in these matters. And on the basis that this raises important constitutional questions, on the basis that this raises important constitutional questions, the Attorney-General has taken the decision that she has.
The member for Isaacs is warned. The member for Herbert has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future is ensuring Australians are kept safe and secure, and is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for Herbert for his question and thank him for consistently backing up the troops in his hometown of Townsville. He's a very active participant in the life of the Laverack Barracks, and I know it's greatly appreciated by not only the troops but their families as well, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as we're seeing in the Ukraine at the moment, the dreadful circumstances unfolding, there's no certainty in Europe and there's certainly no certainty in the Indo-Pacific as well. This is a very uncertain time in which we live. And Mr Speaker, from the first day that this government came into office, we have rolled out our plan to protect Australians. We've taken decisions to restore funding because when we came into government, Mr Speaker, Labor had reduced spending on defence down to 1.56% of GDP, Mr Speaker. It was remarkable because it was the lowest level since 1938. And every day since then, Mr Speaker, and under this Prime Minister, we have rolled out our plan to keep our country safe, and we will do that into the future. We've done it, Mr Speaker, by increasing the number of troops in the Australian Defence Force. We'll increase that to over 100,000. Mr Speaker, we will increase resources to the Australian Signals Directorate in this budget, a plan of $10 billion over the next decade, Mr Speaker. And the reason that that is important, Mr Speaker, is that we know that at the moment our soldiers are on the front line in the cyber war with state actors and organised criminal figures seeking to attack the Australian public. Businesses, aged care facilities, hospitals, government institutions, and, Mr Speaker, it is rising at an exponential rate. So when Labor was in government, spending on the Australian Signals Directorate, which is the agency within the Australian Defence Force, the front line of keeping our country safe, stopping the banking system from closing down or attacks on our energy network. Do you know, in 2012-13, when the Leader of the Opposition was last in government, and as a Deputy Prime Minister to Kevin Rudd, his actual mentor, Mr Speaker, one that he doesn't ever want to speak of, but one whom he admires and contacts for advice regularly, do you know that the spending in the ASD then, in 2012-13, Mr Speaker, was $269 million. Now, I'll tell you what that figure is in 22-23. Not $369 million. It's not $769 million. It's $1.66 billion, Mr Speaker. So at a time when Labor demonstrated their plan on defence to rip money out of defence and away from the men and women of the ADF, we have put in additional money and we will continue to do so because we have a plan to keep this country safe.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. The government has admitted using taxpayer money to fund a factional fight in the Liberal Party and used a pretence that there are constitutional issues behind this intervention. Isn't the only way to end the rorts, to end the waste and end the corruption to end this government?
The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, that question is clearly out of order. Mr Speaker, it is not unusual for it's not unusual for matters that affect the Electoral Act or the way in which electoral laws work in this country, Mr Speaker, for the Attorney General or indeed for the...
I'll just say that a question that may be asked may not be, if the Deputy Manager of Opposition Business resume his seat. Members may not like a question, they may not like what is asked in a question, but that can be refuted in an answer. I don't believe that the question offends Standing Order 100. The question's in order, and the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No, I don't agree with the assertions and allegations made by the Leader of the Opposition. Mr Speaker, I'm very used to the Leader of the Opposition thinking sledging the government as an alternative for an economic plan, Mr Speaker. It's not an alternative to an economic plan, Mr Speaker. What the Leader of the Opposition thinks is he can breeze into government, Mr Speaker. He can breeze into government without being upfront with the Australian people about what he would put in a budget after the election. The Australian people know what out's in our budget, Mr Speaker. It was tabled this week, it's been voted on this week. What is in our budget, Mr Speaker, is for everyone to see. And tonight the Leader of the Opposition has to deliver his alternative budget, his alternative economic plan. But this is a tired old opposition, Mr Speaker. Their last set of plans were rejected at the last election.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, this did go to... It was a very specific question, and it went to the funding of taxpayers' money being used
the
to
Leader
fund
of the
a
Opposition will
factional fight
resume his seat.
in the
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. There was a proposition that was put in the question. Member for Braddon is warned. The member for Braddon is warned. There was a proposition in the question. There was a proposition in the question which effectively became a very, very broad question. The Prime Minister, if you don't want to open the gate, don't make a broad question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And that is indeed the case. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition does not think he needs to put an economic plan before the people before the next election. He's been promising one, promising one, promising one. The member for Maribyrnong, Mr Speaker, he put a plan before the Australian people before the last election. Now, they rejected it. They rejected it in the higher taxes, Mr Speaker. So this time round, the Leader of the Opposition wants to get all clever and tricky, Mr Speaker, by being a small target. Well, he's not a small target, Mr Speaker. He's a vacant space when it comes to economic plans. Because, Mr Speaker, you cannot defend the country. Mr Speaker, you cannot ensure the security of our country, of our budget, of our social security system, Mr Speaker. You can't do all that without an economic plan. And this is a Leader of the Opposition, this is a Labor leader, Mr Speaker, who won't tell the Australian people what his plan is. The Australian people know what our plan is. And here we are, Mr Speaker, the question time today. We're not getting questions on the budget. They've put up the white flag on the budget, Mr Speaker. We couldn't even get through a whole question time on the budget yesterday because they put up the white flag because they know that this is the economic plan that Australians need, that delivers real relief for real problems right now, and a plan, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, that sets up economic opportunity for decades to come. The Labor Party, Mr Speaker, he leads a tired old opposition made up of the relics of a failed government under Kevin Rudd, Mr Speaker. He doesn't even have the confidence to show the confidence in the member for Gorton as the Shadow Minister for Defence. There's a clear choice, Mr Speaker. Myself as Prime Minister and a Leader of the Opposition who's never done a budget in his life. And you've got, Mrs Speaker, you've got the Defence Minister or the Shadow Minister that even, Mr Speaker, this Leader of the Labor Party does not have confidence in, Mr Speaker. We have a plan. The Leader of the Labor Party has no plan.
The member for Flynn has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Resources and Water. Will the Minister update the House on how the strength of the Australian resources and energy sector under our plan for a stronger Australia has and will continue to benefit regional Australia in this year's budget? And is the Minister aware of any alternative policy approaches? Thank you.
The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Flynn for his question, and can I acknowledge Ken and Shirley for their many years of service to their local community. Shirley's in the gallery this afternoon. They've served both their local community and the Australian people incredibly well, and the member for Flynn will be retiring at this upcoming election. But, Mr Speaker, the member for Flynn, I was with him last week at the Curragh coal mine in Blackwater. We were out talking to the people who are working there, a mine that has been in place for many decades, delivering for the Australian economy, providing jobs into regional Queensland, into the member for Flynn's electorate, coal into local power stations, export dollars into this country. And, Mr Speaker, those people who are working at the Curragh mine, they understand how it is that we pay for the commitments we make, like the ones in the most recent budget, where we are delivering record investment into regional Australia. Mr Speaker, in a member for Flynn's electorate, very close to mine, the Paradise Dam, we've committed $600 million to repair Labor's failures. This is the biggest public infrastructure failure in Australia's history, requiring $1,200 million worth of repairs. It is an incredible investment, but it must be made. Now, Mr Speaker, we have to pay for these investments. We have to pay for the essential services Australians rely on. We have to pay for our defence investment. We have to pay for dams like we've made commitments to into Queensland. Mr Speaker, the resources sector has done an outstanding job over the COVID pandemic. Outstanding. At the outbreak, they were forecast to do $246 billion worth of economic activity. They are currently forecast to do $379 billion this financial year. I expect to get an update next week, and they will smash all records. Smash them. It is an incredible outcome. It allows us to make the commitments like we've made in the recent budget, whether that is further support to build new streams of the economy, Mr Speaker, in critical minerals, whether it's to build and strengthen our traditional sectors in coal and oil and gas and others. And, Mr Speaker, we need to continue to make a stronger economy for a stronger future for all Australians. For all Australians. And every single worker in the resources sector understands that it is their contribution, the hard work that they do, the taxes that they pay, the royalties that are paid to state governments that allow us to pay for those essential services, whether they are roads or schools or hospitals or others. But, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about alternatives. I'm asked about alternatives. Now, we know what the alternatives are from the Greens. The Greens have been out publicly saying that in a deal with the Labor Party, they would end all new oil, coal and gas projects in this country. Finish them. $500 billion worth of investments, 80,000 jobs. And in fact, they said they've got more work to do. There's unfinished business from the last deal they did with Labor and the Greens. And, Mr Speaker, it is very straightforward. We will continue to support the sector that pays the bills in this country because we must. We must make a stronger economy. We must build a stronger future for all Australians, no matter where they live, and our record investment in regional Australia will help deliver it.
The member for Hotham has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. In a recent survey of more than 1,000 aged care workers, 97% said they were yet to receive the bonus payment the Prime Minister promised them, despite it being available from the 1st of March. If the Prime Minister hasn't delivered on this one-off payment to the heroes of the pandemic, why should Australians believe anything he announced in his budget?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. In particular, in relation to workforce bonus payments, $600 million has been made available across 4 payments to our aged care workers. That includes 3 payments which have already been made. The current payments are being made. That $600 million is for those that have retained and stayed in the working period during the course of the pandemic. Those aged care workers have been fantastic, and that is why we have had not just 1, not just 2, not just 3, but now we are entering the period for the 4th payment. And those first 3 payments have already been completed. The total funding that is available is $600 million, but for our nurses and for our aged care workers, this is one of a multiplicity of payments. And within the budget, we have not just the workforce bonus payment, we also have the clinical placements. That's 5,250 new clinical placements at $15 million for student nurses in the aged care and support sector. There's $148.7 million for aged care nurses' payments over and above the temporary payments, and that is a payment of up to $3,700 per year.
The Minister will resume his seat.
On relevance. This is very interesting information being provided by the Minister. My question is, you've made the funding available. Why have 97% of aged care workers not yet received it? What good is it if they don't get the money?
The member for Hotham will resume her seat. The Minister has the call. The Minister is being relevant to the question. The Minister has the call.
Payments are made as and when they are received, and this period has. And all of the order. No, when the applications are received. Payments are made as and when the applications are received. In relation to the first 3 periods which have been completed, I am advised that all 100% of applications received have been paid out. Now, as the current period commences, those payments are also being made as the appropriate periods are being reached and as the payments applications are being made and received. In addition to that, though, the aged care registered nurses payment of $3,700 per year is also available, not just as a temporary measure, as a pandemic measure, but as a long-term retention initiative. Further than that, in the budget, there's $5.7 million for the Aged Care Transition to Practice program, which supports up to 1,300 registered nurses. In addition to that, the Aged Care Nursing Scholarship and Allied Health Dementia program of $26 million is contained and is currently being distributed. In addition to that, the current budget has $32.7 million for rural health multidisciplinary training programs. In addition to that, $2.6 million of online training is available. But in relation to those periods which have been completed, for which applications have been received, 100% of payments have actually been made.
The member for Ryan has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future includes a medical research plan to support all Australians through the discovery of new medicines and medical treatments, including for those living with ataxia and mitochondrial disease?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Ryan. Last week, we visited the Wesley Medical Research Institute in his electorate, and there we saw the Medical Research Future Fund plan, the 10-year plan, in action. It was funding for a clinical trial for children with ataxia, a neurodegenerative condition which takes their lives. And that condition was at the heart of this clinical trial. And this clinical trial was sponsored and fought for by parents such as Christina and Simon, the parents of Goldie Digby. Goldie Digby is a young girl who already has significant signs of this degenerative condition. But this clinical trial is a world first, applying an enzyme to provide a potential treatment for up to 40 children who otherwise would not see, on average, their 25th birthday. And that's real and significant and important. It's a plan that's in action, a plan which is delivering life-saving treatment. And that treatment, if it is found to be successful, then goes on to become new medicines which are listed. And those new medicines have been at the heart of what we have done to save and protect lives over the course of the last 5 years and beyond. In particular, though, we know that this Medical Research Future Fund plan sets out a $750 million commitment, to clinical trials for rare cancers and rare diseases, something which I would hope that every member of this House would support, and I am sure that they do. And moreover than that, though, the plan also includes funding for mitochondrial disease, $15 million to support the work of Maeve's Law. I am pleased to advise the House that the Senate joined the House last night in supporting Maeve's Law for mitochondrial disease. It is named after Maeve Hood. Maeve's parents are Joel and Sarah, and they also fought for their daughter to have access to new medicines and new treatments, and for all other parents who may come afterwards to have access to mitochondrial donation to ensure that children have the chance of being born without this condition. And so we have seen through that the best of this parliament, of what we can be as a parliament, as a nation, working to a plan, working to a funded plan, but working across the aisle to ensure that we give children and families real hope. And for Maeve and for Goldie, the plan is what we do, but Maeve and Goldie are why we do what we do.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business on indulgence.
Thank you, Speaker. On indulgence, can I join the Minister in welcoming the passage of Maeve's Law in the Senate and thank him particularly for the work that he's done to make that law a reality and for reaching across the aisle, particularly with my predecessors, the member for McMahon and the member for Ballarat, and assuring this was, as far as possible, a cross-aisle effort in both houses. Can I also, on indulgence, thank the Minister in what I imagine was just his last answer for a long and successful career in this place. And we all look forward to the Prime Minister now telling the Australian people in the middle of a pandemic who he proposes as the next Health Minister if he's successful.
That's going beyond an indulgence. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the best advice he has to offer Australians struggling to pay rents that have skyrocketed under his government is that they should just go and buy a house? Does the Prime Minister realise just how out of touch that is?
The Prime Minister has a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, once again, the Leader of the Opposition has come forward, Mr Speaker, and outline things not as they were, Mr Speaker, and seek to misrepresent, Mr Speaker, the remarks I made on this matter. In response to this matter, I said specifically that the budget provides for rental assistance through the Commonwealth Rental Assistance Program, Mr Speaker. That's what I made exact reference to, the rental assistance provided the government at some $5 billion a year. I also made reference to the fact that our government has delivered lower taxes for Australians, which helps them deal with cost of living pressures. And, Mr Speaker, I spoke specifically about the great work in this budget that has been helping Australians who have been ready to buy their own home. Not everyone can buy their own home, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition's bought plenty of homes, Mr Speaker. He's bought plenty more than I have, and good for him. Good luck to him. We celebrate success, Mr Speaker, on this side of the House. At the last election, the only housing policy those opposite had was to put up the taxes on housing, Mr Speaker, to put up the taxes on housing. But under our government, we went to the last election and we said, Mr Speaker, we were going to get more Australians able to buy their own home. And over 300,000 of them, Mr Speaker, 300,000 Australians have been able to get into their home as a result of the home guarantee, Mr Speaker, as a result of the home builder program, which was opposed by the Labor Party, as a result of the First Home Super Saver program, which was opposed by the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. But not only that, we put $2 billion to support the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, which I established as Treasurer, Mr Speaker, which is supporting affordable accommodation, affordable rents, through partnerships with the community housing sector to ensure that can be delivered. So whether it's the Commonwealth Rental Assistance Program, whether it's indeed, Mr Speaker, the reduced taxes that we put in place, also those who are trying to save, who save for their first home, the Home Guarantee Program, which there's now 50,000 places each year in this budget, Mr Speaker, with 10,000 of those places reserved specifically for people in regional areas, because we know how tough it is there, Mr Speaker. We're supporting Australians to get into their home. That is something we specifically promised we would do, and we have delivered. At the last election, the only policy they had, Mr Speaker, was to put up taxes, and I know the Shadow Treasurer says this: any housing policy that doesn't have changes to negative gearing and capital gains.
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. Direct relevance. There was no provision for alternative policies in that question. There were none. We allowed a free-ranging response. But
the Deputy Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. There was no opportunity to talk about alternative policies. The question, the last part of the question in particular, does open up the field. The Prime Minister is. I'll direct the Prime Minister to return to the question, but that last part of the question enables a very, very broad response. The Prime Minister has.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Quoting the Shadow Treasurer, any housing policy that doesn't have changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax is just a shocker. Mr Speaker, in their DNA is to increase taxes on housing and to abolish negative gearing. Now, our government won't do that. Our government will never do that, Mr Speaker, because we know if you abolish negative gearing, the rents go up. The rents go up, Mr Speaker. They pretend to care about rents, but they don't, Mr Speaker, because in their DNA they...
The member for Swan has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please inform the House of the critical importance of having a plan to create a stronger economy for a stronger future, with more jobs, more opportunity and guaranteed essential services? Mr Speaker, I'm also going to ask him, is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my dear friend, the member for Swan, for his question. He is retiring at the next election, and I know Christy McSweeney, Mr Speaker, will make a great member for Swan, and she puts herself forward, Mr Speaker, for the Liberal Party in the seat of Swan. So I thank the member for Swan for his great service to this House. I particularly commend him, Mr Speaker, for the incredible work that he did for those who were raised in a very similar situation to him as orphans, Mr Speaker, and were taken care of. And Mr Speaker, can I thank him for his tremendous service to this House over many, many years. Mr Speaker, our plan, which we've made very clear, our plan, Mr Speaker, has been set out in our budget, delivered by the Treasurer, Mr Speaker. His fourth, Mr Speaker. Our budget sets out that comprehensive economic plan for the future. We know it's working because Australians are working, Mr Speaker. They're working, and women are working in a participation rate in the labour force at record levels. Mr Speaker, our economic plan is working, and that economic plan means a stronger budget. That economic plan means that over the last 12 months, the budget has improved by some $100 billion and more, which is the biggest economic recovery we've seen in this country in 70 years, Mr Speaker, and that is a product of a plan. Our government has a plan, Mr Speaker, to continue to grow the economy. It has delivered for Australians. It is delivering real relief now to cost of living pressures, and it's delivering real opportunities for Australians in skills, in infrastructure and investment in their businesses. But, Mr Speaker, in the regions as well, it's delivering more jobs. It was the Shadow Treasurer who said that the test of a budget is jobs, Mr Speaker, and he's right about that. He's right about little else, but he's right about the fact, and our budget, Mr Speaker, has delivered already, our plan, some 375,000 additional jobs, and that is on top of what we were before the pandemic hit. 1.2 million jobs created overall as part of this recovery as we've come back from the pandemic. Mr Speaker, our economic plan is guaranteeing the essential services in health, in education, the highest bulk billing rates we've seen, 2,700 listings and amended listings in the pharmaceutical benefit schemes, which is changing lives and saving lives. And Mr Speaker, it's investing our strong economy from our plan to ensure that we've been able to rebuild our defence forces and build it up from the lowest level we saw as a share of the economy under Labor since before the Second World War. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about alternative approaches. I can't tell you about alternative approaches from the Labor Party because they haven't told anybody about those alternative approaches. The Labor Party, a tired opposition, the relic of an old failed government, Mr Speaker, dwindling away there on their benches with no economic plan for the future. No economic plan, no idea, Mr Speaker. And on that note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.